710 KRV Talkback, Dr. Gelman, holding the iron microphone, streaming live on KURV.com, website, talkbackonline.com. What else is there? I guess that's it. 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. Here we educate the people on our side. We're not trying to be confrontational particularly, except in the forms that truth will always be confrontational with lies. And all we hear these days is lies, so I guess there's confrontation. Where to begin? Well, we have those fools that run our country and the fools, the rest of us that allow it, with their so-called budget debate, which is just simply nonsense, of course. There is no budget debate. It's all a farce. Everybody protecting their own interests, knowing full well that nothing will get passed. Unable to use a scalpel to eliminate the billions and billions of dollars of waste in the federal government, taking a hatchet to everything so that what is needed is attacked as much as what is not needed. And since what is not needed is such a vastly greater proportion of the budget and takes up so much of the money and is so overpriced for its value, that what is necessary is always going to be hurt more than what is unnecessary. And that is directly due to that what the unnecessary is provided by those with political influence. We have an ignoramus as president. I thought that we'd hit bottom with George Bush, but no, we have someone digging through the basement, going into the sub-basement, Barack Obama. The level of stupidity is at every stage, whether it's in selecting basketball teams or foreign policy or national policy, has no historical perspective. It does not deserve to be president or much of anything else. But since everything in the media is historic this, historic that, two popes meet, that's historic. Barack Obama goes to Israel, that's historic. You know, the only thing that would be historic would be media types that knew what they were talking about. Now that would be history making. Instead of the airheads, useful dupes, and fellow travelers that inundate us with their nonsense 24 hours a day in this 1984 world. We discussed the Israeli-Palestinian situation before, but it's been a little while, so I'm going to go through it for those who are not aware, may have forgotten. It's all a canard, of course. The Middle East situation is only an issue because the United States has made it one. Without the United States, there wouldn't be any problems. All the funding that goes to the Arab nations is from the United States, 100% from the United States, and Israel kowtows to the idiocy of the United States by accepting foreign aid. I might remind them that South Vietnam did the same thing, and where are they today? The traditional storyline of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is endlessly repeated through the media, government, and system of education. As the story goes, following World War II and the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews were murdered, mankind seeking to assuage a guilty conscience, what a laugh, established via the offices of the newly formed world dictatorship known as United Nations, supposedly at the behest of survivors of European Jewry, which is nonsense because they had no political power whatsoever. An artificially contrived state of Israel carved out of in the midst of ancient Arab Muslim nations, forcibly and unjustly taking the land from an indigenous population, completely innocent indigenous population, by the almighty and intelligent Arab people, which have no Nobel Prize winners, known as the Palestinian people. This is complete mythology, accepted by the ignorant, disseminated by useful dupes and fellow travelers in government, the media, and system of public education, promoted by those motivated by virulent anti-Semitism, including Barack Obama. There is not now, nor has there ever been, a Palestinian people, nor has there ever been a Palestinian country, and therefore no justification exists historically or presently for the creation of a Palestinian state. Based on ancestral claims, the most legitimate state and people in the Middle East, based on longevity alone, is Israel and the Jewish people that can claim a documented continuing presence at one level or another for over 3,000 years. Only Israel, of all the Middle Eastern states, has been populated by the same ethnic group espousing the same religious beliefs for such a period of time. Only Israel, of all the Middle Eastern states, has been populated by that group. The Bible, written over 3,000 years ago, details the history of the Jewish people and the ancient state of Israel. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found in Israel in 1947, have fragments of the Bible which were written at least 2,100 years ago. King Solomon built the first great Jewish temple in the year 1000 BC, more than 1,500 years prior to the birth of Muhammad. The Quran, on the other hand, makes not a single mention of Jerusalem or Israel, or gives a name to anything in the region. Israel, the nation of Israel, in one part or another, has been invaded multiple times and taken over by various countries, including Assyria, Babylonia, Persia, Rome, Britain, the Ottoman Turks, and other nations as well. The Temple of Solomon, which was destroyed by the Babylonians, but then was reconstructed in 515 BC. That temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD at the end of a particularly brutal Jewish uprising. At that time, about 60 years later, in 132 AD, a subsequent Jewish rebellion, which lasted 3 years, was about all that the Romans could stand. And so, after they put down that rebellion, the Romans, seeking to quell any further unrest, changed the name of the region from Israel to Palestine, meaning the land of the Philistines, an ancient enemy of Israel, which at that time had ceased to exist. The region referred to as Palestine is defined artificially as a province of Rome, did not reference any particular ethnic group, and came into existence 450 years before the birth of Muhammad, and more than 500 years before the first Arab ever set foot in the region. In the year 330 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine created the eastern capital of the Roman Empire in the ancient city of Byzantium, in what is now Turkey. The new Roman capital will become known as Constantinople, named after the Emperor Constantine. It was Constantine who legalized Christianity in the year 313, making it the official religion of Rome. Rome, from that point on, would become a Christian empire. The official fall of the Western capital was in 410 AD, though as an entity, Rome pretty much ceased to exist before that. The actual sacking of the city of Rome occurred at that time and therefore is accepted as the official end of the Roman Empire, of the Western Roman Empire. Byzantium became the new center of the Roman Empire. Palestine, the name, disappeared completely from any historical record and did so 150 years before the birth of Muhammad and the founding of Islam. And the term would not reemerge until the First World War, 1,500 years later. There were neither Arabs nor Muslims in the region at the time, and certainly no ethnic Palestinian population. The only constant was the ever-present Jewish population. The Arabs first entered the region as conquering Muslim hordes in the 7th century AD, displacing the hundreds-year-old Christian societies. 6 years, this did not occur. The invasion did not occur until 6 years after the death of Muhammad, and originated in what is today called the Arabian Peninsula. All the Arabs in the Middle East today, even those referred to erroneously as Palestinians, are of the same people, of the same ancestry, from the same origins, arriving at the same time. There is no distinction between the Arab of Syria, or Egypt, or Lebanon, or Jordan, or Iraq, or anywhere else among the Arab nations of the Middle East. The Arab armies of Muhammad and his descendants and followers conquered the Middle East and much of Europe as well, slaughtering, subduing native Christians, and creating the largest slave trade in world history. Despite what Barack Obama and Jesse Jackson may say, it is the Muslims and the blacks themselves who have propagated the largest slave trade in the world history, some of which would still exist today in Arab and African countries. At that time, among the most prized slaves were white Christians, particularly white Christian women, who seemed to be a favorite among the Arab slave and Muslim slave holders. In 1099, Christian crusaders coming not from Byzantium, but from the Western Europe of the Dark Ages, managed to retake Jerusalem and also some surrounding areas from the Arab Muslims. However, in 1187, Jerusalem fell to not the Arab Muslims, but to the Kurdish Muslims, and particularly Kurdish general Saladin. By 1291, the last of the Crusader strongholds, which was located in Acre in the northern part of what is now Israel, had been destroyed by these Muslim forces. Over the subsequent decades, the Arab Muslims found themselves losing all control of the Middle East to different groups, particularly one group called the Mamluks, which were originally slaves that were slaves of Arabs that overthrew their masters and became master of their former master. These were individuals that came from different types of ethnic origins. They were called the Mamluks, and they took over much of the Middle East from 1250 until the middle of the 15th century. When appeared in the region a powerful group called the Ottoman Turks, which had been wreaking havoc through much of the rest of the world at the time, and entered the Middle East, or more properly, took over much of what is now Israel and its immediate surrounding area right around 1517. They had first conquered Constantinople, eliminating the last vestige of Christian power in the region that is now Turkey and the surrounding areas. Jerusalem fell to Ottoman control in 1517. The region and all inhabitants, including the Arab Muslims, remained under Ottoman Turkish Muslim dominion for 400 years, until 1917, when, as a consequence of its alliance with the losing German side, the Ottoman Empire was dismantled by the victorious Western powers, primarily the French and the British. This was not the only empire dismantled. The Austro-Hungarian Empire of Europe, which had been around for 1,000 years or so, was also dismembered. The mandate of the French and British was to last only until around 1948. Basically, their charge was to restructure the region into a more stable form, not only the Middle East, but also the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, of course, when you allow politicians, the brainless politicians, to do that, you can imagine what kind of a mess you're going to get. And the mess they got is the mess we have today. The mess they wrought is the mess we have today. Around 1920, after 1,500 years, more as a matter of administrative name-keeping, the word Palestine reappeared and encompassed the region of Transjordan, Israel, and what is now the West Bank. The Western powers, victorious through the blood of millions and millions of wasted lives, looked upon Europe and the Middle East as some type of gigantic jigsaw puzzle which they could reorder, taking the pieces and cutting them up any way they so chose. The Ottoman and Habsburg empires disappeared, and new nations arose under mandates issued by the New World Order, dictated by the League of Nations, the predecessor of the world dictatorship United Nations. The former Austria-Hungarian Empire was broken up into new nations, and these new nations were Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was in itself made up of Macedonia, Croatia, Serbia, and Montenegro. The Poland was also created as a nation that comes and goes, and it was reformed at that time. Poland was taken from pieces of Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary, and that gives you an idea of the mess that was going to come from that. Part of Russia was taken to form the new countries of Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and the repercussions of that were yet to come. All the independent Muslim states in the Middle East, existing in the Middle East today, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Turkey, were created at that time, less than 100 years ago. Also meant to be included at that time was a Jewish nation. In fact, an agreement towards that end had been reached between the Jewish people and the government of England in the Balfour Declaration of 1915. The area that is currently Saudi Arabia, that cesspool, was conquered infighting among Arab tribes, including the Saud family and the Hashemite family which now controls Jordan. The Saudi Arabia never existed either. It was always a part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire and other empires. Local rulers who happened to have the best fighting camels, I suppose, were in charge. The Turks dictated who was which family or which group or which tribe was going to be in charge at a time. Once the Turks were defeated, then the local tribes went after each other. They're all Arabs, of course, and they went after each other. Finally, the winning group was led by an individual, barbarian named Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, who defeated a series of rivals with the aid of the British, by the way. Can't do it on their own, you know, and unified what is now the Arabian Peninsula onto what is now referred to as the Saudi Arabia, which is has no legislature, has no laws, has a dictator, an aristocratic family, much the same as Europe had 1,000 years ago. So that is the great Saudi empire, nothing but a single family's playground. The last unsuccessful challenger was the leader of the Hashemite family, Hussein ibn Ali, the great-grandfather of the recently deceased Jordan's King Hussein. Therefore, the new states of Syria, Turkey, Lebanon, Egypt, and Iraq, Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East are only recently created, and through the same process that established Israel as an independent state. All these states, except Turkey, were created by territory taken from the Muslim Turks and given by Western powers to the Muslim Arabs. They did not win that land. They were given it as a gift by the Western powers. Yet no one questions the legitimacy of these states. Turkey subsequently went about its favorite Muslim pastime of ethnic cleansing, butchering millions of Christian Armenians and Greeks whose ancestors predated the Ottoman Turks by over 1,000 years. Yet no one questions the legitimacy of Turkey, a land populated and governed by Christians 1,000 years before the arrival of the conquering Muslim Turks. In fact, all the present-day states populated by Muslim, whether Turkish or Arab, were taken by force from their indigenous Christian populations which had existed there for hundreds of years before the first Arab or Turk ever entered the region. But where is the demand that these truly stolen lands be returned to their previous rightful owners? Well, there is none. And we will continue this. I want to take this phone call from John. 79 KRV. Thanks for calling, John. What's your comment?
Well, Palestine at the time of Christ, there's
no such country as Palestine.
No, there never was. And all this stuff was created, and all this stuff is all about, well, our president is over there now in the mess. You know, and you can't accomplish anything in the Middle East. I mean, that thing is a chaos, and it has been ever since the Middle Ages.
Well, it's the same chaos that you have in Africa and much of Asia and really much of the rest of the world. The only distinction is the United States has meddled in there for reasons of oil only, has nothing to do. Do you think Barack Obama knows how to spell Palestine? I doubt it.
I do too.
You know, so we're only there because of the oil. It began with the British and the French, and the torch was passed to the United States. Well, I guess the question arises, John, in the chicken and the egg deal. What came first? The United States. What came first? Wars or the United States intervention? Or essentially, without the United States intervention, you don't have wars.
That's
There
right.
never would have been a
What
World
happened?
War II. There never would have been a Middle Eastern wars, and not all that is directly related to United States intervention.
That's
That
right.
includes Asia and much of the rest of the world. Anything else?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Churchill and their decisions that led to where we are now.
Absolutely. What people have never learned is that let's put politics, let's put other issues aside. It was the British and the French in 1939 that declared war on Germany.
Right.
Germany did not declare war on the British and the French. More than likely, the Germans would have attacked France under any circumstances. But France is the one that declared war. Now, if someone declares war on you, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to have to declare war on them, otherwise you're a sitting duck. It is highly unlikely that Germany would ever have attacked Britain if Britain had not declared war on Germany first. Also, it is highly unlikely that the extent of the Holocaust would have been any near as severe as it ultimately was if that conflict had not arisen between Britain and Germany. So there's so much of world history which the American people are ignorant, as if these issues came out of nowhere. If the United States is the biggest supplier of money and weapons to the Arab nations, American soldiers in Afghanistan are being killed by money that the United States has given to Saudi Arabia for the purchase of oil, but that doesn't make it right, okay? You don't go purchase things from your enemies in order to give them the money to buy weapons to kill your own soldiers. So it's really a sickening sight that American soldiers are being killed by bullets purchased with American dollars.
That is correct.
Anything else?
Well, when are we going to learn?
Never.
Never. That is correct.
So we just have, okay. All right, John, thanks for your call. So moving on. Palestine, a word meaningless to Arabs and Muslims until 1915 or so, was located on either side of the Jordan River and comprised about 65,000 square miles of territory. That region, which the British called Palestine simply because they needed to call it something, included, as we have said, what is now called the state of Jordan. In fact, the state of Jordan now, or the country of Jordan, comprises about 3/4 of this territory. How did the Hashemite family get a hold of Jordan? And we will discuss that when we come back from this short break. 710 KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, holding the microphone. 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. Streaming live on KURV.com. My website is Talkback, right? Talkbackonline.com. I should write that down. Be back after this break. Okay, we're back. 7 KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the microphone. 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. I guess before we continue, we'll take this call from Jerry in San Benito.
Good morning, Dr. Gelman.
Good morning.
Yeah, you're on the issue with the name Palestine. You know, ever since I learned the truth about that, where I've attended church, they were singing an old hymn, and it just got under my skin so bad because it actually made reference to Palestine instead of Israel, and I couldn't believe it. You know, it was an old hymn, you know, and I just couldn't believe that they'd actually use the word Palestine instead of Israel. So yeah, it's one of the things that there's a lot of ignorance on, you know, amongst Christians, evangelical Christians even, you know, and if we go by the Bible, then we know we're always supposed to back up Israel. You know. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to ask you, this week I have been on YouTube listening to some teachings of someone that I'm sure you probably know, but I guess the times that I've listened to, I've never heard you mention him. And I just absolutely have loved it. What's your take on Milton Friedman?
Oh, well, great economist, Nobel Prize winner. Believed in the capitalist system as the way that all economies would run. That was the greatest manifestation of individual liberty and freedom was through the capitalist system, which is merit oriented and apolitical and independent of race, color, ethnicity, religion.
Right. Because as I heard him, some of the sessions that I heard him on, I thought, boy, that reminds me so much of Dr. Gelman. And then maybe I just never heard you mention him, but I thought, my goodness, that's some solid information that you don't get in school or anywhere. This guy was brilliant, and he communicates things at a level that a layman like myself can understand. You don't have to. He's a brilliant guy, but he doesn't make it complicated. He makes it really simple.
The really smart people who really know what they're talking about since they understand it so well, they're able to relate that information to even someone not versed in the field. Right. When you hear someone talking you don't understand, it's not that he's smart or we're not smart enough, is that he's not smart at all. He doesn't because he can't relay the information. Now, Milton Friedman created what is referred to as the Chicago School of Economics. They had a number of conservative Nobel Prize winners in economics, I think 3 or so. And they were like at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, you had the Harvard School of Samuelson and some other phony baloney economists, also Nobel Prize winners. And it's kind of interesting in the 70s and 80s, when Poland became free of the Soviet Union, they elected to invite the Chicago School of Economists because they didn't think that because they had listened to the Harvard School and they said, we've already tasted socialism. We don't need more of that. However, the country that did accept or was taught by the Harvard School of Economists was Chile under Allende, Salvador Allende, who tried to turn that into a communist country and was overthrown. So, and of course, the United States is being run by which group of economists? Harvard economists. Timothy Geithner, perfect example, as well as many others in the government. I mean, Barack Obama himself. And so, though he's not an economist, still Harvard trained. And so, when you gather together a bunch of Harvard people, you better watch out. Oh, by the way, now that we're talking about that, 7 justices on the Supreme Court are from Harvard and 2 from Yale. Now that's diversity. Anything else?
Wow.
Is that it? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, sir.
Huh?
Dr. Gelman?
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that, in fact, this summer I'm going to get my 2 children to read. I'm going to get a book by him called Free to Choose and then just have them read it and, become well-versed so when they go off to college, they won't be brainwashed,
Right, and there you have it in one sentence what a free country and a capitalist country is. The freedom to choose. And you change it with one word, or lack of freedom to choose, and there you have communism, fascism, and Barack Obama. And one word changes everything. But freedom, if there's one thing that separates a free nation from an enslaved nation, is the freedom to choose.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Gelman.
Thanks a lot. All right, back to the Israeli-Palestinian situation. So, in 1948, you have you have this territory called Transjordan. It's called Transjordan because in Palestine, Transjordan, because it covered both sides of the Jordan River. 3/4 of it was on the east side of the Jordan River, and the remnant 23% or so was on the west side. The British were allied or had created an alliance with the Hashemite tribe, the tribe that was thrown out of Saudi Arabia by Abdul Aziz ibn Saud. And so, since the Hashemites, both sides were being benefited by the British, both the Saud family and the Hashemite family. So in order to make it up to the Hashemite family that were also allies with the British, they gave them the entire eastern part of Transjordan, encompassing 77% of the total land that was meant to be divided up between Jews and Muslims. So, but this didn't bother anybody. Because then the people that we refer to as Palestinians, they were then going to have to divide up the 23% that was left over, and so get like 12% of the original amount. Now, but nobody complained about the theft of 77% of the land to the Hashemite tribe, just as no one had previously complained of the stealing of the Ottoman Turks' land from the Ottoman Turks and handing it over to the Arabs. Nobody complained about that. Nobody complained about the transference of millions of square mile of land from one country to another by force, theft. But the 8,000 square miles of Israel, that's where they drew the line. They said, well, if you want to steal millions of square miles for Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and all the rest, that's okay. But if one Arab country steals it from another, if the Saud family steals it from the Hashemites, that's okay. But giving the Jewish people their rights for 8,000 square miles of territory among the millions of miles of land, now that's where they draw the line. And one might wonder, why should that be? What is the difference between these Muslim tribes, whether they're Turkish or whether they're Arabic, and the Jewish tribe, if you want to put it that way? You think it has something to do with religion? Do you think maybe that it has nothing to do with land? Because no one seemed to care, Arab or non-Arab, seemed to care that 3/4 of the land that was meant to be given as a Palestinian state was stolen by the British and given to the Hashemite tribe. No one seemed to care about that too much. And why do you, so what is the difference now? Does it have something to do with the fact that Israel is populated by non-Muslims, by Jewish people? Do you suppose maybe that's the real issue and maybe not land is the real issue? Since every parcel of land in the Middle East was taken from its previous owners and given to the Arab Muslims, do you think that, and no one said anything about that? On November 29th, 1947, the United Nations recommended that both a Jewish and Arab state be created in the remainder of the mandated territory west of the Jordan River, and that the city of Jerusalem be internationalized. Even though all of these events dramatically favored the Arabs and were punitive and unfair and unjust to the Zionist Jews, the Jews were accepting of it. It was the Arabs who rejected it, though almost all the territory that was created, well over 98% of all the territory created, fell into Arab hands. Britain, firmly allied with the oil-rich Arabs, and despite all this illegal and imperialist activities, and acting in contravention to the League of Nations mandate, was still not finished in its perfidy, continuing as regards the Jewish people. In 1939, the British government created a white paper in which the only people that could not immigrate into the land that they referred to as Palestine were of Jewish origin. What did that mean to the Jews about to experience the Holocaust? Well, it meant that the only possible avenue of sanctuary was closed off by the British at exactly the moment that Hitler was beginning his elimination of the Jews. Is that a coincidence? Okay, now we have Edward calling from Edinburgh. 7 KRV, thanks for calling. What's your comment?
Dr. Gelman, good morning. I have a question, sir. President Obama was in the Middle East these past few days.
Yeah.
He professed his support to the Israeli people, the Americans, that the United States still supports their country.
Yeah.
I guess my question is a yes or no question. Was he lying to the world when he said that the U.S. will back up Israel?
Well, yes.
Could you elaborate on that, sir? Why is
Well, Barack Obama is an anti-Semite, among other things. He has said that Jerusalem, the East Jerusalem, should go to the Muslim Arabs. He has called for a partition of Israel in half, in which the Gaza Strip is connected to the West Bank with a strip of land in the middle that connecting the two regions, reminiscent of what Hitler did to Czechoslovakia, being allowed by the Western powers. Barack Obama is an ignoramus. He has no idea what's going on in the Middle East. He is at heart a Muslim. Look what he has done. He has he has done for Osama bin Laden what Osama bin Laden cannot do for himself. The fundamentalist Muslims are now in charge of Libya. They are in charge of Lebanon. They are in charge of Egypt, Algeria. They are about to take over Jordan. Syria is about to fall. And so what you have that was what Barack Obama has done since he became president. And so his goal, and you saw, if you remember, how he prostrated himself before the Saudi king. I don't know if you remember that. I mean, that was a gut reaction. Barack Obama is a Muslim. He believes in the caliphate. He believes in the 12th coming. He believes in a Muslim takeover of the world. He is the one that has given more money to the Muslims than any other president of the United States. He is the only president that has offered to divide Israel along the lines of the Saudi plan. So let's not forget World War II and how the British and Neville Chamberlain was perfectly willing to. What did Neville Chamberlain say? Peace in our time. Right. And how did they give peace in their time? By sacrificing Austria, Czechoslovakia, and parts of eastern parts of France. These are all sacrificed by the Western powers in order to achieve peace in their time. Barack Obama is saying exactly the same words. He says that peace is the ultimate goal. Well, slavery is also peace, and I don't think that's the ultimate goal. And the United States was created through revolution. That's not peace. I don't know what else. He surrounded himself with Susan Rice and I can't remember her first name, Powers, who have openly asked for basically a return to the 1967 borders, which are indefensible. So Barack Obama has asked for the stopping of the building of settlements and had to be reminded that Jerusalem is not a settlement. And
he's also pro-Palestinian statehood.
Yes, he is.
The way things are now, I don't see that ever happening.
Well, I don't know. Well, let me tell you this.
Sir.
A Palestinian state will never come into existence. Israel may be destroyed. That may happen. But the idea that there will be a Palestinian state is a bunch of nonsense. Because as soon as Israel, if it happens, is destroyed, then that area will be taken over by Egypt and the surrounding Arab nations. There will never be a Palestinian state. It will always be in control of as it was before, by other countries. So that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen there.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Dr.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for calling. Now we have Terry calling from Arlington. Thanks. Okay. Thanks for calling. 7 KRV. What's your comment, please?
Hey, Dr. Gelman.
Yeah?
I'm wondering, the world powers that divided up all the land over there, and even the world powers of today, did they divide the land up and give the Jews that small area of land just because they're anti-Semitic, or what was the reason?
You're saying, why did the Allies divide up the Habsburg Empire and give it to was to give land to the Jews in the Middle East? Is that what you're saying? Well, how do you come? So the creation of Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia and Poland and Latvia and Finland and Estonia, all that was in order to give the Jews land in the Middle East 30 years later? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm wondering, they gave the Jews just a very small portion of land.
Yeah.
You mentioned back in before World War I or sometime around there, 1915.
Well, no, they promised it, but they actually never did it.
Okay, and then that came after World War II then.
Right.
But I'm wondering, all the Saudi nation, Saudi Arabia and the Arab nations got large chunks of land, and then you just explained that how Jordan ended up getting 75% of the leftover land.
Yeah.
Who actually made those decisions? Was it the UN that made those decisions, and was the reason that they left such a small portion of land for the Jews, is that just due to anti-Semitic views? Well,
Britain was as anti-Semitic as the Germans, and the who did it was the Western powers after World War I through the League of Nations, including the United States, though it wasn't part of the League of Nations, divided up Europe for whatever reason, political, economic, or whatever, and the Middle East for that. So I don't know exactly why they divided up the way they did, but you're asking who did it. It was the League of Nations, primarily England and France, and also with the behind the scenes was the United States. And the reason that Israel ended up with such a small piece of territory was not particularly anti-Semitism on the part of the League of Nations. It was because they were allied strongly with the Arab nations, and in order not to displease the Arab nations, they left Israel very small. In fact, as I was going to say here shortly, 1 week before Franklin Roosevelt died, he wrote a letter to the King of Saudi Arabia saying that he would never allow a Jewish state to be formed without Arab permission. That was in 1945. And so it wasn't that Franklin Roosevelt was an anti-Semite. He was an anti-Semite, as most Northeastern aristocrats are, like Bill and Hillary Clinton, among others, and Barack Obama. They are definitely anti-Semitic. But it was more of a political move, is why they did it.
I see. I'm really glad I found your show. You're a brilliant man. Can I ask you, you probably know Mark Levin, or you've heard of him.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you hold the same, political views or not. Would you ever consider being a guest on his show? Or?
Yeah, but he's kind of a tough personality. He kind of rants and raves and screams and hollers. And I do that once in a while, but I try not to make it 90% of my show. And so,
yes,
but I consider myself, if you just haven't been listening or just started listening, I've written a book on the Constitution, and though I'm not a lawyer, which is why I can do that, because if you're a lawyer, you can't do it because lawyers don't understand it. So, so I really don't. So I mean, I don't. I think I'd be uncomfortable on his program. I don't have guests, and I'm not guest to anybody because that's not what I'm about. So I just prefer to lecture. Just to lecture people.
Is your book out yet, sir?
It's finished, and it's off in the hands of the. I'm self-publishing it, so it just has to be put like in a book form, and so and it'll be free. It's free. I have a day job, and it's free. I even ship it for free. So if you wanna address me to my website, or lrgelman@aol.com, 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 and just send me your email address. I'll or your address, your physical address, or any way you want it. I will ship that book to you probably in about 30 days.
That would be awesome. Look forward to it.
Okay.
One other question.
Yeah.
I believe it was last Saturday you were talking about the global warming. I know it's off subject.
Oh, that's
Can
fine.
I get any of the information that you shared with your audience on your website?
Yes, I have a DVD, an hour-long DVD that I have that has been out for a year or so, and which I actually have put on the television and some cable slots, and I'll send that to you. So you just
very good.
Just give me a place to send it. And once again, I don't charge anybody for that. And it's an hour long. It's a professionally made one. I had someone do it for me, and I think it's pretty good. And it gives all the information in there. Although I am creating another what do you call it? Not version, but with updated information, which I'm in the process of doing right now, but is not ready for distribution.
Well, I appreciate your brilliance, Doctor, and God bless.
Well, thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Though I really don't. I think people mistake being informed as brilliant. I'm not brilliant. Nowhere near it, because I've met brilliant people, and I'm not them. But what I have done is I am disciplined, and I am persistent, and so I keep looking into things until they make sense to me. Because so much of what I hear every day, whether it's in a classroom or whether it's on the television or in the newspaper or anywhere else, is garbage, and it makes no sense, and it's mindless blather, like what's going on in the TV right now, for example. It's mindless blather, meant purposely to keep us ignorant and uninformed. So what I do is I approach it, these issues, and I apply logic to it. I apply a certain logic, because you have to be careful, even if the information comes from a reputable source or a source one agrees with, does not necessarily mean that it's correct. And so you have to be very careful about that. So most of what I do is I have to prove it to myself. It has to be proven, and it has to be logical, and it has to make sense. And that's the way I do it. So I'm definitely different than most of these other people. Okay, we have to go to a break. 7 KRB Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. We will return on the Palestinian-Israeli issue after this break. Okay, we're back. 7th KRB Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK, streaming live on KURV.com. Our website is talkbackonline.com. The Palestinian-Israeli situation, the perfidy of Britain matches or even surpasses that of the Nazi Germans. They closed off the land of Israel in 1939 to immigration, knowing full well what Hitler was up to. Britain, a nation of aristocrats, has always been strongly anti-Semitic, and it continued along that vein. Jews were prohibited from immigrating into Palestine, though no other ethnicity was given the same restrictions. Britain did not stop there. It murdered Jewish settlers, blew up ships laden with Jewish refugees, incarcerated tens of thousands in concentration camps in Cyprus. Israeli underground forces, led by the amazing Menachem Begin, future Prime Minister of Israel, led an insurgency which ultimately drove the British out of Palestine. At this point, I would like to interject that the mythical Golda Meir and most of the Labour Party, including Ben-Gurion, were in agreement with the British on keeping Jewish individuals from coming in from other nations. They did so in order to remain in good stead with the British and to maintain political power. So the Jews, the mythical Jews, which are honored for no reason that I can imagine, such as Golda Meir, Moshe Dayan, Ben-Gurion, and others, were nothing more than puppets of the British government, complicit in the murder of millions of Jews. How history, there's a lot of blame to put around, to go around, and Jews also have to answer to that, because they were complicit as well. Israel declared its independence. Unlike the Arab nations that were handed their countries on a silver platter, having been stolen from the Muslim and Ottoman Turks, Israel had to fight for its land. This nonsense that Israel was handed the land by the United Nations is a joke. The 5 Arab armies attacked Israel from Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, from Saudi Arabia, and Iraq, attacked Israel on the day that it declared its independence. So much for the United Nations. Israel was not helped one little bit by the United States, Harry Truman notwithstanding. In fact, Jews who try out from outside Israel who tried to ship arms or purchase arms for Israelis were stopped specifically by Harry Truman and the United States government. In fact, I believe the only reason Harry Truman agreed to allowing the state of Israel to be created was that he felt that would be the death knell of the state, because by allowing the state to be declared a state of Israel, a Jewish state of Israel, that was the spark, you might say, that the Arabs used, the Arab legions used to launch their assaults. My personal opinion is Harry Truman, and especially looking at his actions afterwards, where he prohibited not only the United States from sending arms to Israel, but also blocked arms shipments from other countries to go to the Jewish people of Israel. I feel that Harry Truman's ultimate motive was to justify the slaughter, the last remaining redoubt of Jews in that part of the world. It's my opinion. We all know that his wife Bessie was so virulently anti-Semitic that she would not allow any Jewish advisors to Harry Truman into their house. Like husband, like wife, I would think. So Israel is the only legitimate state in the Middle East. However, only Israel's rights were questioned and denied. The United Nations ratification was nothing more than fulfilling a debt it owed to the Jewish people from 30 years previously. The same process that created that created Turkey, Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and all the other Arab and non-Arab nations in the region. The United Nations resolution called for the withdrawal of British forces and the termination of the mandate by August 1st of 1948, and the creation of an independent state by October of 1948. Between August 1948 and October 1948, the British armed and trained the Arab legions. British officers armed and trained the British legions. At the same time, they murdered Jewish resistance fighters, confiscated weapons, blocked weapons and blocked people from coming into the state that was going to be the Jewish state of Israel. There was at that point no reason to do that, since the British were going to leave the area. Britain, by the way, 50 British officers led the Arab legions in October of 1948 in the attempt to destroy the state of Israel. In a communication to the United Nations Palestine Commission dated January 19, 1948, the Palestinian Commission said it was determined to reject the partition and refused to recognize the United Nations resolution. During their withdrawal, the British perfidious policy of obstructionism to the legally mandated Jewish state manifested as refusal to allow an interim government by those who would occupy the land. Neither Arab or Jewish interim government was allowed, though neither Arab nor Jew was allowed to create an interim government. That was completely unjust because all the surrounding nations were Arabs, and therefore the Arabs that were intending to take over the land of Israel after killing all the Jews, they were allowed to organize, fund, plan, recruit, and train in all the surrounding nations of Israel, a privilege denied the Jews of Israel. In the 8 months from the announcement until the withdrawal of British troops, England's policy was to allow continued infiltration by armed Arab militants into Israel, to permit continuing attacks by armed Jews against unarmed Jews by armed Arabs, continuing the blockade, continuing the incarceration of Jews in Cyprus. The Jewish people were left to fend on its own. Immediately after Israel's declaration of independence, it was attacked by 5 Arab armies. All observers, including Harry Truman, fully expected the rapid annihilation of the Jews in Israel, basically completing what Hitler had started. Israel, without a standing army, poorly armed, denied military aid from any source, faced what seemed overwhelming odds. But sometimes justice is triumphant. The United Nations mandate was illegally contested and breached, but the United Nations did nothing to enforce its own laws and stood by idly as the illegal war against Israel proceeded. The beleaguered Jews fighting alone, outnumbered, inadequately armed against a larger and better trained enemy, abandoned by the world, something that Jews are very used to by now, knew it was in a fight to the finish in which the Jews would receive no quarter. Somehow, Israel miraculously was able to stave off the Arab barbarian belligerents and survive as a state after a year's battle in which thousands of Jewish individuals were killed in the illegal war. Whereas the Arab nations had received their country gratis through the Western powers, Israel had to fight for every square inch of land. Despite the enormous human toll by Israel, surrounded by enemies of 10 times greater number, they somehow prevailed. The land of Israel was not awarded to the Jewish people by the United Nations, but reconquered by the Jewish people from those who had themselves taken possession of the region through wars of conquest. Yet, who now asks that the land, let's say like in Spain, which the Catholic forces took from the Muslims after 800 years of Moorish occupation, who now asks, outside of the Muslims themselves, that land, that Spain be returned to the Moors? After a complicit world had permitted and abetted the murder of 6 million completely innocent Jews, 1.5 million of whom were children, it was perfectly willing to allow the survivors to be slaughtered as well. Nothing changes. The state of Israel was formed from land legally and rightfully theirs. Now, the birth of the state of Israel did have a collateral effect on the invention of the mythological Palestinian refugee. Since there's no such thing as a Palestinian, you cannot have a Palestinian refugee. What they're referring to is the individuals who lived in the region that left the region not because of the Jewish people, but because they were told to do so by their own Arab Muslim allies. They did so in order to create a killing field, because the Arabs are notorious for shooting around corners, and they just wanted to make sure that there were no Arabs around and that it would allow them to slaughter the Jews unimpeded. They didn't want to have a valuable bullet wasted in a barbaric Arab's body. The 400,000 so-called Palestinian refugees abandoned their homes voluntarily at the behest of the Muslim Arab leaders and military commanders. It was considered to be a momentary inconvenience until the last of the Jews were eliminated, which should not have taken very long. The Arabs, as indeed most of the rest of the world, believed that the destruction of Israel and its people would be swift and total. It was not Jewish-instigated aggression that created Arab refugees. It was the desire of the Arab armies to create Jewish killing fields. Indiscriminate firing, which is what the Arabs are famous for, would hit only Jewish victims. The Arab generals wished to remove all obstacles between their bullets and the Jews. They felt themselves justified in their prediction of the outcome, as indeed it was the same opinion held by the rest of the world, including Harry Truman. Ironically, these so-called refugees did not fall under democratic Israel control, but despotic Arab control, and resided in Arab-controlled West Bank and Gaza. The Palestinian refugee situation was created by the Arabs themselves. We have proof of that. After the Jewish state was created, the Arab countries around the world expelled Jews that had been there before the Arabs were there. For example, in Syria, in 1948, there were 30,000 Jews. Now there are 100. In Egypt, there were 75,000 Jews. Now there are 100. In Tunisia, in 1948, there were 105,000 Jews. Now there are less than 1,500. In Iraq, in 1948, there were 135,000 Jews. Now there are 100. In Algeria, in 1948, there were 140,000 Jews. Now there are none. In Morocco, in 1948, there were 265,000 Jews. Now there are less than 6,000. The total number of Jews forced into exile by the surrounding Arab countries numbered double the number of Palestinians that left their homes. 850,000 Jews were forced out of their ancestral homes in Arab lands and went to Israel. Where are the Jewish refugee camps? Where are the Jewish terrorist gangs? There aren't any. The reason that there are refugee camps in the West Bank and in Gaza is because the Arab brothers of the so-called Palestinians refuse to assimilate the people into their own nations. That's the way Arabs are. Tribalism to the hilt. But where are the Christians of the Middle East? What happened to them? Well, the Arabs took care of them a long time ago. So this is not something new, but an old pattern that Arab Muslims and Muslims in general have followed for a long, long time. After the 1948 armistice, an uneasy peace ensued, with Muslim Arab belligerents continuing on a daily basis through guerrilla assaults, usually upon unarmed men and women and children, targeting particularly, as they do today, residential neighborhoods, hospitals, and schools. The aggression by the Arab Muslims was not due, as many would have us believe, as a consequence of a perceived injustice done to a people referred to as Palestinians, but simply to a continuation of 1,500 years of virulent Arab anti-Semitism. Let me ask you this. In the 19 years that the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were under Arab Muslim control, never once was there a call for an independent Palestinian state. Never once was there a call for the help of the Palestinian people by anyone, least of all the Arabs themselves. In 1967, the surrounding Arab nations sought yet again to destroy tiny Israel. However, Israel surprised Egypt, Jordan, and Syria with preemptive strikes. The United States refused to help Israel, as did most of the rest of the world. Everyone figured that the large Arab armies in Jordan, Syria, and Egypt, which were 10 times in number and in strength militarily as the Jewish armies, that they would annihilate the Jewish armies and the state of Israel in short order. However, unfortunately for the United States and Western Europe that were expecting to reap the rewards of the annihilation of the Jews, it was the Arab armies who were destroyed, and Arab territory which was taken as a defensive measure. What can we learn from all this? That the issues surrounding the Arab-Israeli-Palestinian situation today is not that Israel is an intruder nation, for it is less of an intruder than Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, or any other Middle Eastern nation. The hatred towards Israel is due directly to the fact that it is a Jewish state. It is the hatred of Jews and not concern for Palestinian that drives the conflict. The terrorist organization Al-Fatah, considered the military wing of the movement to create a Palestinian state, was founded in 1964, 3 years before Gaza and the West Bank were occupied by Israel. The sole purpose of Al-Fatah, by its own admission, is the annihilation of Jews and obliteration of Israel, and has nothing to do with the creation of a Palestinian state. Hamas, Hezbollah, and Al-Fatah were created specifically to destroy Israel and to kill Jews, and have nothing to do with the creation of a Palestinian state. By the 6th day of the 1967 war, a shocked world, having until then stood idly by when it seemed all but certain that Israel would be annihilated, raised hue and cry, not to defend Israel, but to save the aggressor Arab nations. An agreement was reached in which the thoroughly defeated Arab nations were spared further humiliation, but were still allowed to deny the legitimacy of Israel. Israel, unfortunately, continued to trust the United States, much to its negative consequences. The United States, as usual, forced its allies, which it had refused to help, to submit to Arab demands. In the ensuing years, the world would remain mute as Arab terrorist attacks ceaselessly rained upon Israeli civilians and children, but did nothing to help Israel when it tried to defend itself. In 1970, a Palestinian uprising, not in Israel but in Jordan, was crushed with the killing of thousands of Palestinians. If Israel had been more politically astute, they would have supported the Palestinian insurgents in overthrowing King Hussein and the Hashemite dynasty, and then allowed the creation of a Palestinian state. By 1973, the Arabs once again tried to attack Israel. One must try to imagine a society and a culture whose only reason for existence is the destruction of another people. For the Muslims, apparently every waking breath, thought, aspiration, desire, and goal of life, and the only reason they have children, is to create more to kill and murder non-Muslims, particularly Jews. The Arabs by then had been fully rearmed by their Soviet allies and felt confident that this time they would prevail. And they almost did. but not thanks to military prowess of the Arab Muslims, but to the feckless cowardice and stupidity of the Israeli government led by Prime Minister Golda Meir and Chief of Staff Moshe Dayan. A long and sorrowful pattern of betrayal of Jewish people by Jewish leaders. Prime Minister Golda Meir and Chief of Staff Moshe Dayan, following in the footsteps of the Jewish leaders who betrayed their people in Poland and Hungary, who allowed and actually facilitated the transportation of Jews into gas chambers and concentration camps, took a position, Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan took a position that no preemptive strike, not only would no preemptive strike be permitted against the assembled Arab Muslim armies, but even prevented a general mobilization of Israeli reserves. Though it is true, Israelis' false friends, Nixon and Henry Kissinger, though it is true, I meant to say, that Henry Kissinger and President Nixon actually, through diplomatic channels, threatened Israel with a cutting off of aid if they should take an overt defensive posture or lead a preemptive strike. Nevertheless, it was a decision by Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan which allowed Israel to be attacked without proper preparation. Once the assault began, Israel was thrown back on its heels. How could Moshe Dayan and Golda Meir have forgotten so soon the murder of millions of their brethren, to which the world did not raise a finger? They had forgotten, apparently, and thus did they join all those Jewish leaders who have for so long and so often betrayed their own people. The world, following long tradition, desired the extermination of these ever troublesome Jews. The Egyptian and Syrian armies, supported by their Soviet allies, launched the attack on the holiest of Jewish holidays in October of 1973. The war is referred to as the Yom Kippur War. The effectiveness of the attack launched by Egypt and Syria surprised Israel, which had grown complacent behind their Bar-Lev line, reminiscent of the Manzhou line that the Germans went around in 1939 and 40. In the early stages of the war, the Arab predictions of annihilation of Israel seemed imminent. The large Arab armies were well armed and continuously resupplied by the greatest Soviet shipment airlifted of armaments in the history of the Soviet Union. 65,000 tons of munitions went to Arab armies. The United States response? Nil. Israel managed through incredible valor, sacrifice, and verve to turn the tide, and the Israeli Defense Forces, against overwhelming odds, managed to successfully beat back the Arab armies and launch a counterattack, and were actually on the road to Damascus and Cairo and had the entire Egyptian Third Army surrounded, ready to be annihilated to the last man. But it was then, and only then, that the world rose up. That included the United States, and swing into action. Now that it was the Arabs who were about to be defeated, those who sat on their hands as Israel faced extermination rose up in righteous indignation when the Jews actually successfully were able to defend themselves. An immediate ceasefire was demanded, and Israel, run by the feckless Golda Meir, in one of its numerous inept political decisions, agreed to do so. At a minimum, they should have destroyed the Arab Third Army. 2 weeks after the war ended, the first shipments of arms, which had already been paid for by Israel, arrived from the United States. The cost of Israeli leadership stupidity, 2,500 Israelis killed compared to the 1967 war where only 600 Israelis were killed, and 10,000 Israeli casualties. Moshe Dayan and Golda Meir, typical politicians, pointed the finger at everyone else, including David Al-Azhar, who was the lone individual in the government who kept his head and did what was right. And he was the one that Golda Meir, the disgusting, feckless, putrid Golda Meir, reminds me a lot of Hillary Clinton. They had David Al-Azhar sacked, maybe because they didn't want any witnesses to their perfidy. Being an honest and upright man, the humiliation and injustice inflicted upon David Al-Azhar resulted in his death of a heart attack at the premature age of 53. In spite of such maneuvering, the sins of Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan were simply too great and too well known, and they were driven justifiably from their positions. They should have been executed or exiled to, what do you suppose? Syria, probably. After the 1973 defeat, the Palestinians began to immigrate into the peaceful country of Lebanon at the invitation of the Lebanese people for supposedly humanitarian reasons. Have to go to a break. 7th KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. We'll come back and we'll finish up on the sad story of the Arab-Israeli situation in the Middle East. I guess we're back. 7 KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone. So we know what the Palestinians did to Lebanon. They basically destroyed the nation. So we'll know what will happen if they take over Israel. Let's take a look at some other little bits of information. Let's take a look at land mass. Egypt has 386,000 square miles. Jordan, 35,000. Syria, 71,000. Saudi Arabia, 756,000. Iran, 636,000. Iraq, 168,000 square miles of landmass. Israel, 8,000. The lands immediately bordering Israel, created by the League of Nations, a mandate which had dismembered the lands from the Turks, added up to 500,000 square miles. The total Muslim-controlled territory in the Middle East is over 2 million square miles. Israel, once again, 8,000 square miles. The population density of Arab lands is 200 people per square mile. In Israel, 800 people per square mile. In Jerusalem, in 1948, there was a grand total of 65,000 inhabitants. In 1967, there were 250,000. And today, there are about over 1 million inhabitants in Jerusalem, nearly 1 million inhabitants in Jerusalem, of which 250,000 are Arabs. There are more Arabs in Israel today than in 1948. The Arabs own more land in Israel now than they ever owned. There are more Arabs in Jerusalem today than the entire population of Jerusalem and Israel in 1948. The Arabs occupy more land today in Israel than in 1948. But let us examine the character of the antagonists. Israel wishes to live in peace with its neighbors. Muslims openly declare war and declare their wish to destroy Israel. Jews live in peace in all parts of the world, while Muslims make war on every population they encounter, whether in Africa, Asia, Europe, the Philippines, and anywhere else. Jews have no territorial desires beyond their little sliver of land. Islamists want to rule the world. Jews are prohibited from proselytizing, while Muslims forcibly convert non-Muslims and wish to kill all non-Muslims and all those who will not convert. Israel risks its soldiers' lives by denying them armor, artillery, and air cover if enemy civilians are in the region. Arab, Muslim, and Persian Muslims use women and children as shields, whereas Islamists use churches, mosques, hospitals, schools, and residential neighborhoods to conceal and store weapons, as well as launch strikes. Knowing Israel will not fire on such structures, Islamists themselves purposely target hospitals, schools, synagogues, churches, and even mosques, as well as residential areas. All religions are free to practice in Israel. Islamists prohibit other religions under penalty of death. All places of worship are free to exist in Israel. Most Islamist countries prohibit the existence of any church or synagogue. All people are free to visit Israel. Jews cannot enter many Islamic lands. No democracy exists in any Arab Muslim nation. Israel is a democratic republic where even Arabs are allowed to vote, something they're not allowed to do in any other country. Forget about the garbage of what's going on in Egypt and the Arab Spring, soon to be winter. Muslims treat women as second-class citizens. Jews treat women as equal. Muslims have 8 Nobel Prize winners with a population of 1.5 billion Muslims. The 12 million Jews have produced over 200 Nobel Prize winners. Muslims immigrate and procreate in Europe at a rate 4 times the national population. Meanwhile, and consume their welfare state. Meanwhile, a Jew on welfare is almost unheard of. The majority of rapes committed in Europe are by Muslims against non-Muslim women. When is one hear about Jews raping anyone? The barbarism and backwardness of Islamic State is legion. The total number of books translated into Arabic during the 1,000 years since the age of the Caliphate is less than the books translated in a single year into English. Hitler's slaughter of Jews could have had nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Pogroms targeting Jews throughout Europe, expulsions of the entire populations of Jews from Spain and Germany, rampant anti-Semitism even in the United States, including Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt, Bill and Hillary Clinton, are clearly unrelated to any Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or in fact any Jewish-Muslim conflict. Thousands of years of expulsions, persecutions, pogroms of Jews could not have been a consequence of a Palestinian-Israeli conflict, as it did not exist. The overt hypocrisy of the Palestinians and their allies using a rationale for a homeland based upon a principle of an indigenous people's rights of national sovereignty collapses in the face of the relatively recent Palestinian attempts to conquer Jordan, Lebanon, and their support for Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. Muslims call it a reconquest of Spain as well as other regions of Europe, puts a lie to their statements. Attempts to spread Sharia law in Africa and Asia and even the United States gains momentum, and those exposing such efforts are threatened, attacked, and killed. In fact, over the last 1,500 years, no other entity comes close to matching Islam's history of invasion, forced conversions and assimilations of native populations in conquered lands, brutality, enslavement, and murder to all those deemed infidels of Islam. If the land called Israel had been given to non-Palestinian Muslims, there would be no conflict today, and the Palestinians would still be without a state. The true reason of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is simple: virulent, age-old anti-Semitism. Intolerance, ignorance, hate, envy, lust, greed, gluttony, misogyny are the characteristics of the Islamists. That is why not only Israeli Jews are attacked, but Jews all over the world. That is why not only Jews are attacked, but non-Muslims as well. This occurs in every country with a significant Muslim minority. That is why no peace agreement between Israel and Arab states will ever work, because the source of the antagonism is not being addressed: Arab-Muslim hate of Jews. Unfortunately, mass slaughter of the innocent by the guilty is not uncommon in the history of mankind. Already we've mentioned the slaughter of the Greeks and Armenians by the Turkish Muslims, but what of the slaughter of the Russian peasants by Stalinists, the Chinese by the Japanese, and then the Maoist Chinese? What of the Kurds of Iraq and the Tutsis of Rwanda? What did these mass slaughters have to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Why the slaughter of Coptic Christians in Egypt, Christians in Nigeria and the Sudan, and Christians of Iraq by Muslims? Is this a consequence of a Palestinian-Israeli conflict, or further evidence of the barbaric intolerance of Muslims? What of those of the Baha'i religion hanged in Iran, or the destruction of Buddhist monuments 1,000 years old in Afghanistan by the Muslim Taliban? It's not just the Jews that are attacked for simply being who they are. There are such things as malevolent forces. It is very likely that the only reason Christians survive in Lebanon today is because of the presence of a Jewish Israel. If Israel falls, the Christians in Lebanon, and for that matter, Egypt and Iraq, are doomed, as the ones in Iraq have already been doomed thanks to United States intervention. The distinction in the case of the Jews of Israel is the innocent victim has gained the upper hand over the guilty perpetrator. The nation's politicians, such as Barack Obama and diplomatic corps, so used to profiting from alliances with dictators, autocrats, fascists, communists, and Islamists, are at a loss as to how to respond. They wish the autocrats of the oil-rich Arab nations to succeed and that Israel be destroyed and Jews annihilated, but cannot say so publicly. How to maintain the facade of espousing justice while aiding and abetting monstrous gangsters. The nation's diplomatic corps are far more comfortable laying wreaths and erecting monuments, lamenting over the failure to respond once it's certain that it's too late to respond. As the crocodile tears stream down the faces of presidents, prime ministers, and diplomats, concealing their relief that the bad guys are once again victorious, they anticipate their profits. The conundrum faced by the diplomatic services of the nations is what to do when the innocent victim is fighting back and has a real possibility of achieving victory over the malevolent, rich, and powerful. The dilemma faced by the craven diplomats places them in a very awkward position. Actively defending the innocent is out of the question, as this would undermine the entire purpose of the diplomatic corps, which is to sacrifice the weak to the strong. What to do with those who have the temerity not merely to resist, but defeat the larger enemy forces? The answer is role reversal. The diplomats, with the aid of the ignorant media, that's you, Katie Couric, craft a role reversal where evil is made to appear virtuous and the virtuous made to appear evil. The aggressor made to appear as the victim, and the victim made to appear as the aggressor. Those in the right who have somehow impossibly defeated the belligerent aggressors now, by being victorious against the belligerent barbarian, will find themselves portrayed as perpetrators and guilty with their greater numbers, supplies, and political influence, and above all, oil, while those with greater numbers, supplies, land, political influence, and above all, oil, are portrayed as victims. In such role reversal does the diplomatic corps of nations seek to conceal their collective perfidy. Mythology of Arab Muslims fomenting a renaissance, which is now spread throughout our system of education. The Renaissance came about as a result of the Crusades, taking back the remnants of Greek and Roman civilization from the Byzantine state centered in Constantinople. Jews have been abandoned and betrayed. They are not alone. Armenians, Kulaks, Cambodians, Kurds, Chinese, Cubans, Greeks, Tutsis, Hindus, and so many others have met similar gruesome fates, a consequence of an uncaring and often conniving world. It's just in this case, the victims are fighting back. Today, there are still those who insist the United States is an ally of Israel. What did the United States do to help the Jews under Hitler? Did the United States bomb any of the rail lines leading to concentration camps or to the gas chambers? No. The United States allow any refugees to come to the United States, Jewish refugees come to the United States? No. The United States do anything to save the Jews? No. Here is a letter from President Roosevelt to the King of Saudi Arabia after the war is over. It says, I received a communication which Your Majesty sent me under a date of March 10, 1945, in which you refer to the question of Palestine and to the continuing interest of the Arabs in concurrent developments affecting that country. I am gratified that Your Majesty took this occasion to bring your views on this question to my attention, and I have given the most careful attention to the statements which you make in your letter. I am also mindful of the memorable conversation we had not so long ago, and in the course of which I had the opportunity to obtain so vivid an impression of Your Majesty's sentiments on this question. Your Majesty will recall that on previous occasions I communicated to you the attitude of the American government towards Palestine and made clear our desire that no decision be taken with respect to the basic situation of that country without full consultation with both Arabs and Jews. Your Majesty will also doubtless recall that during our recent conversation I assured you that I will take no action in my capacity as chief of the executive branch of this government which might prove hostile to the Arab people. It gives me pleasure to renew to Your Majesty the assurances which you have previously received regarding the attitude of my government and my own as chief executive with regard to the question of Palestine, and to inform you that the policy of this government in this subject is unchanged. Thank you, Franklin Roosevelt. Thank you, Barack Obama. Refugees arriving in ships and even children were denied entrance into the United States. Thank you, Franklin Roosevelt. And thank you for Barack Obama. Thank you, Bill Clinton, for sending back people who wanted to flee Cuba. So nothing changes, as we have noted. The United States is the worst enemy of Israel and the best friend of Arab Muslims. Why? Why do so many Jews believe the United States is a friend? Very dangerous concept. If you don't believe it, talk to the South Vietnamese. If not for the United States, the Ayatollah would not be ruling Iran. If not for the United States, Jordan would not be in the hand of the Hashemites. If not for the United States, the Saudi family would have been long dismembered. It was the United States, with hundreds of thousands of troops, which not once but twice fought wars not to save the Free State of Israel, but the Muslim dictatorships of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and Croatia. The United States foreign policy has resulted in the decimation and exile of Christians in the new Muslim state of Iraq, which under Hussein was a secular state and a safe haven for Christians. The United States has abetted the imposition of intolerant Muslim rule in Pakistan and Afghanistan. The United States slaughtered tens of thousands of Christian Serbs to spare a militarily defeated Muslim Bosnia. Bosnians and Croat Muslims had supported the Nazis in World War II. After the Christian Serbs were bombed into submission, the Muslim Croats and Bosnians destroyed hundreds of Christian Russian Orthodox churches. Thank you, Bill Clinton. The United States has given billions of dollars to Egypt, Hamas, Hezbollah, and al-Fatah. It was the United States that brought back Yasser Arafat, terrorist, and the PLO from exile and made an international hero of Arafat. The United States is the biggest supporter of the anti-Semitic dominated United Nations. The United States, more than any other nation by far, has forced upon Israel the forfeiture of territory, the prohibiting of self-defense, the arming of Israel's enemies. Despite all of Israel's concessions and sacrifice of life, there is not a single piece of evidence that Israel has received any tangible benefit. The United States has sold out Israel at every turn. Even the World Trade Center attack was due to the United States invasion of Iraq and Kuwait in order to save Saudi Arabia. And that saving of Saudi Arabia's Saud family is what so incensed Osama bin Laden and the Islamists for having influential troops in Saudi Arabia, home of Mecca and Medina, the two most revered Islamic sites. Not so coincidentally, the Saudis have given hundreds of millions of dollars to Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Barack Obama. Let's talk about the concept of the self-hating Jew. The diagnosis describing those Jews harboring anti-Israeli sentiments believed a psychological malady, a consequence of a subconscious guilt complex for the suffering of the Palestinian people at the hands of the Jews in Israel. In fact, the actions of the self-hating Jew are conscious and purposeful and long predate Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It is the latest manifestation of the Jewish councils of Poland and Hungary, thank you, George Soros, who collaborated with the Nazis for personal gain, and those Jews on the Jewish Council who collaborated with the anti-Semitic British in the 30s and 40s, also for personal gain. A collaboration which acquiesced to blocking Jewish immigration and even to the extent of betraying Israeli Jewish patriots to the British. Patriots such as Menachem Begin and Avram Stern among them. Avram Stern, the head of the Lehi group of Israeli freedom fighters, was taken by British after betrayal by the Jewish consul Ben-Gurion, thank you, and summarily murdered by the British agents who waited until he was handcuffed and his back turned to shoot 3 bullets into him, killing the great patriot Avram Stern. Menachem Begin was Ben-Gurion tried to murder Menachem Begin on the ship Atalena after luring him on board with promises of negotiating, and as soon as Menachem Begin entered the Atalena ship, then Ben-Gurion ordered the firing of short batteries onto the ship, which was sunk, and Israeli freedom fighters of the Irgun that tried to make it ashore were machine gunned by Jews under Ben-Gurion. The United States has sold out Israel at every turn. And Jews have sold out Israel and Jews at every turn. The concept of Holocaust denial also misses its true target. Holocaust denial is irrelevant in an Ahmadinejad regime, the leader of Iran. Denial of a Holocaust in the past pales in significance to the potential of a future Holocaust. Just as the Holocaust of the 20th century could not have occurred if it were not for the cowardice, corruption, ineptitude, and complicit behavior of Jewish political leadership, it is the cowardice, corruption, ineptitude, and complicit behavior of Jewish leaders today which puts Israel and Jews at risk. Denial of the true cause of the Holocaust, the failure to respond to rising anti-Semitism, the failure to recognize the world's leadership is corrupt, the willingness to place the fate of Jews into the hands of United States politicians, such as Barack Obama and other reprobates, will result in the next slaughter of Jews. Israel is delusional if it believes that the creation of a Palestinian state will bring peace, or that any of its concessions, whether it is the giving up of the Gaza and the West Bank or southern Lebanon, will result in peace. The only peace the Arabs seek is the peace of Hitler. However, by continuing to sacrifice land for peace, which will prove fruitless, as seeking the pot of gold at the end of a rainbow, Israel must realize the importance of the state of Israel, and that can be understood easily if one considers the stark difference it would have meant for the Jews of Europe if the state of Israel had been created as promised in 1920 instead of 1948. There never would have occurred a Holocaust, and only Israel's survival will prevent another one, not simply for the Jews of Israel, but for the Jews of the world. It's time that the leadership of Israel came to realize the true reason the state of Israel exists and why it must continue to do so. Jews believed they were part of Spanish society until they were summarily expelled. Jews believed they were part of German society until they were executed. Jews believed they were part of Polish society for 1,000 years, and until the 3 million Jews were annihilated. And 800,000 Jews thought they were part of the Hungarian society until 1944, in which 600,000 were annihilated in 59 days, a year and a month after the Warsaw Uprising. So clueless are the Jews and their Jewish councils. Israel is not a member nation, but an outcast, and we should be thankful, and the Israelis should be thankful that the world reminds them daily of this truth. to be part of the world community for Israel is to have a future, which is what the future was for South Vietnam. It is the future of the Tutsis in Rwanda. It is the future of the Christians in Iraq. It is the future of the democratic forces in Iran. It is the future of the nationalist Chinese in China. It is the future of Eastern Europe in a Stalinist world. That is their future if you depend upon the United States. The Jewish people should be joyous in being openly hated rather than secretly hated. And should be joyous in the fact that now killing a Jew has a price, because Jews are now armed and they never were before. No thanks to Barack Obama. Be honored in being overtly exiled. Be happy in your isolation, or you will become another Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, and another Robert Mugabe, supported by the United States, will rule your land. For safety in Israel can only occur as it would have occurred if the South Vietnamese had been aware that you are on your own, and if you are relying on the United States or other members to save you against a belligerent enemy, you can forget it. You might as well start digging your own graves. Be happy in your isolation, for only in the full knowledge of the world's enmity towards Jews and all other innocents is the survival of the Jewish people and all other innocents possible. Is there a phone call? That's okay. Who is it? Whoever. I can't. All right, whoever this is. 7 KRB, you have 20 seconds. What's your comment, please?
Dr. Gelman, just to tell you that I was in Dallas last week.
Yeah.
I seen a billboard saying that how does it make sense that $20 million goes to Israel?
That's the billboard?
A billboard on the highway.
Oh, well, what sense does it make giving Abrams tanks to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt? Okay, we're out of time. We're out of time. Thanks for your call, and we'll be back next week. 7 KRB. Talkback. Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the iron microphone. Thanks for listening.